This lesson is all about cutting out and layering inside of Photoshop. So important is this fundamental that we're going to break this into two sections. This section is going to be about extracting a subject from an image, and then the second section is going to be about compositing that subject into a different background and making it look a little bit more balanced. Before we start, just take a moment to go to Window, Workspace, and check that you're working in Essentials. If your workspace looks different, then just reset Essentials and we should have exactly the same layout. The file that we're going to use today, if we go to File, Open, navigate to Lion Waiting in Namibia, what we're going to do is take our subject out of this African plain and, in light of recent poaching, put them somewhere a little bit safer, Antarctica. We don't need to worry about that yet. We'll go through a variety of different techniques for doing this, and we'll start with the kind of dumb solutions to doing it, and we'll work our way up to more smart and adaptive strategies. So the first one, we kind of already know from doing a little bit of stuff in the previous lessons on crop. The second tool down, Marquis, can be used as a very simple way of extracting this subject from the background. If we draw a rough rectangle around the lion, don't worry about being too neat, we can always shuffle the Marquis selection with up, down, left and right on your cursors. Then we can right click it or control click it and go New Layer via Copy. When we click this, we'll see a new layer appear inside our Layers window on the right hand side. So we now have two, one background layer and one layer we've just extracted. We don't see any difference for the moment. To see a difference, we would need to turn off our background layer. Next to each layer, there is an eye. This indicates whether that layer is visible or not. If we turn it off, then we can see what we've just pulled out here. Not a great start, but again, if you've done previous lessons, you'll know you could go through with an eraser and try and shave off some of the unnecessary information. However, this looks rather crude, like it's been attacked with scissors from a magazine. Also, if we shave off any fundamental detail, such as round here, we've lost his right paw, we'd have to go back to the background and extract that as another layer, composite them together, and it's awfully complicated. So there's got to be a better way to do this. So let's go on to our sort of intermediately intelligent solution. We'll right click this and delete that layer. Underneath the Marquis tool, there's a different type of selector, the lasso tool. Shortcut for this on your keyboard is L. If we click this, now we can draw freehand a selection around our lion. When you're close to your starting point, you can simply let go and it will close the loop and create a more dynamic selection here. So certainly closer to our original shape than the rectangle, but still not perfect. This little dashed line indicates what's going to come if we extract this to a new layer via Copy. You can see there's a few places where I've kind of messed up a little bit. And this stuff, this bracken underneath, should disappear. Also here, the lion would be missing a tiny bit of its back. So how can we add to this and take away from this before we cut out our new layer? If we hold down Alt, you'll see the lasso symbol now has a little minus next to it. This means that anything we draw now will be taken away from our selection shape. So if we draw around all of this section underneath the lion and let go, you'll see that that's removed from our selection. To add, we just hold down Shift and you'll see the lasso has changed and now has a plus symbol just next to it. Anything we draw now will be added into our selection shape. So there we go. We can do this process all over and get a relatively neat result if we spent a lot of time on it. However, things like the hair are going to always be fairly problematic and long-winded to solve. You could do it if you have enough time, but it doesn't seem the most elegant use of Photoshop. Just to prove the point about how this works and how we can add stuff, I'm just going to add a tiny little section of this straw in the background. Just holding down Shift, you can see we've got a circle now. If I make a new layer via copy and then turn off the background, you can see what came with that selection. All this stuff that we selected and tweaked initially, plus the tiny little extra selection that we started with. Again, we could spend some time working with this and erasing stuff to make it neater, but let's look at some other solutions. Just going to delete that layer again. Underneath the lasso, there are different types of lasso to use. We've already had a look at the freehand one, which is the default, the lasso tool. The polygon lasso underneath will allow us to click multiple times to draw simple polygon shapes. And when we join up, they will form a selection. So if we try that around the line, there are places it will work very, very well, such as going along the straight back and down to the hindquarters. Zoom in a little for you. And I'll make another layer via copy. You can see in places this technique works very well, but again, it still looks like it's been constructed with scissors. Very straight, controlled scissors, but scissors nonetheless. There's one more type of lasso tool you could use, which is the magnetic lasso tool. This is like a hybrid of freehand drawing and some automatic polygon generation of Photoshop. If I click and draw around the line, just clicking once and dragging, you'll notice it drops points where it thinks are places you might want to cut. You'll see that it does it very well in certain areas and rather poorly in areas such as that I'm just working on just here. What it's looking for is differences in brightness, shade, colour, and it's determining where the natural edge is in an image, which is fine and good if you've shot it in a controlled environment, but when you get on to things that we struggled with earlier, such as the hair, it's very bad at differentiating them from the background environment. Again, if I make a new layer via copy here, we can see that this is a reasonable attempt at it, but it has many of the same issues as the polygon lasso layer. Again, we could take some time and we could tidy this up and erase it, but it doesn't stop us having accidentally shaved off some sections or being put in a position where we would be damaging our new layer in order to try and get it perfect. So instead of this, I'm going to try the more sophisticated technique that is better equipped for this sort of job. We'll delete these layers and select the tool just underneath the Marquis and lasso. Down here we have the quick selection tool. This will allow us to draw inside the line and it will look for the broad shape based on these colour differences, based on these brightness differences, and based on lines and shape information. If we draw from the top of the line down to the base, we'll see how well it does in one stroke. Missed the shadow, so we'll take that shadow and go down to the front paws. We'll get just the top of the mane here as well. There we go, not a bad starting point. However, we have taken a few extra things underneath. The Marquis tool, the lasso tool, and the quick select tool all have the ability for you to hold down Alt and minus from your selection by drawing. So I'll just hold down Alt and draw out a little bit of this stuff underneath the lion. And just a little bit on this side. Don't worry about getting it too neat, because we're going to use this in combination of a refinement process. Once we've got our rough selection, you can press Q to see your selection ahead of time. So Q to preview and Q to come back. Up at the top in parameters, we can see Refine Selection Edge. If we click this, it will take us inside a preview where we can see what our subject would look like if we cut him out now. Here we can see not great, not quite as scissory, but fairly jagged still. So inside here, we have a few different options that we can use to tweak this. You can change how we see this shape, so we can see it in the context of its background if you're worried about what you're leaving behind. You can see it on white, you can see it on transparent. It varies depending on what type of image you're going to be working on. I'm happy for this on white. Underneath is where the real power comes from Refine Edge. We can use edge detection to find some of the more complex detail that's getting lost, such as the top of his mane here. We turn on Smart Radius and turn it up, then you'll see that it starts to search around the area for things that it thinks it should be taking with it. If we turn on the radius, then you can see the area that it's searching for information that belongs with the shape that we're cutting out. Very, very clever stuff from Photoshop here. We'll leave this on a little bit, but we'll talk about some of the other behaviours underneath. Hopefully you can see how much improved the top of the hair is at the moment though. Smooth is fairly obvious. If we turn it up, then it will smooth around the edges. This is okay, but we lose some of that clarity to the top here, and we lose the furriness of the front of the lion. On the back it kind of looks alright. We might put it in, but in this image I'm going to entirely dial it out. Feather I'm probably not going to use very much either, but I'll just amp it up so we can see. Feather is this fade on the edges into the background. So these white looking sections at the moment would be semi-transparent. In some compositing this is very useful, but here it's probably going to break down the illusion when we put it in the background. Contrast is almost like the sharpness of your edge, but kind of in terms of how severe this edging is. You can see it looks very, very sharp and pixely now. We probably don't want a great deal of that. We might keep a little bit for the hair, but not a lot. Shift edge, fairly obviously shift the edge outwards or inwards. This will depend on how you've cut your lion. Mine's a little close to the body in places, so I'm going to push mine out just a touch. So I think I'll put my Smart Radius to about 2-3 pixels, so we have a little bit of jaggediness, but a relatively smooth curve to the back of the lion. There are a few nasty bits, but don't worry about these, we're going to correct them in a second. Decontaminate colours down at the bottom won't have a great effect on this image, but if we turn this up, you can see there's a little bit of darkness returning to certain sections of the mane. What it'll do is it'll try and push the colours from the inside of the image towards the edging there, so it looks a little cleaner. If you're taking somebody out of something where there's a skyline and you're getting a lot of blue, this is the fix for it. Turning this on also defaults to outputting this to a new layer with the mask. This is what we want to do, regardless of what you've inputted for your image. Make sure you have output to new layer with layer mask on. Now we have our lion distinct from our background. There's lots of errors on the go here. So there's minor bits of detail missing from the paws, and there's a little bit that we've missed out here where the straw has interrupted the shape, and we can see some extra bits we didn't mean to take. So why is this method better? Well, this method's better because it works almost like old school video compositing. We have our shape, but now if we look in the layers palette, we have it linked to a shape that modifies the layer. If we alt-click this, we can see this funny looking shape roughly following the contours of our lion. What this is a mask. It's easiest to imagine this as a cardboard cutout held in front of a projector that's allowing a shape to pass through it. The mask allows everything there rendered in white to pass through, and everything there rendered in black will be cut out. So essentially we have the same exact image as below, but with this shape cut into it. As such, our decisions here are not destructive. We can paint onto this layer and restore our original image. So if I change to the paintbrush now, shortcut B, go for a slightly bigger brush, I'm going to paint with white on our mask layer, and you'll see our image hasn't lost anything, it's just there in the background, deselected. Now if we go back to our mask, you can see the changes that have happened to this shape. Everything that is white will allow the image to pass through. Everything that's black will not allow any pixels through. If I wanted to paint some black just so that we can see, we can use these default colours over here. X will swap them around, so we're now working with black. And I'll just draw in something silly and ridiculous. And if we alt-click the image again, we can see we've created a hole there by putting black onto our mask. I'm going to go back a few stages and undo this and talk a bit more practically. What this means is, as long as we've got the mask selected, we can paint with black and white to restore certain sections that are damaged. If I paint with white, I'll press X to swap these swatches around, then I can get his hindquarters back. If I paint with black, then I can get rid of these nasty bits around the back. This might be a little bit soft, so I'm just going to up the hardness so we've got a harsher edge here. So I'll try and get rid of some of this stuff just here. Black to take away, white to add back in. Make sure you have the mask selected in your layers window. If you have the original image selected, then we'll just be spray painting black and white over the top of our image, damaging it, which isn't what we want. The point of using a mask is what we create is totally reversible, and if we wanted to, at any point, we could just draw in and get it back to the original image. Once you feel you've made a good selection by using this Refine Edge method, make sure you delete your background by right-clicking or control-clicking and going Delete Layer. With this gone, we should just have our lion and the mask that's being applied to this layer left in our Layers window. From here, we just need to save it, ready for part 2. So if we go up to File, Save As, make sure we keep this in Photoshop format down here. It's the default native format of Photoshop, and keeping it as a PSD will allow you to retain any information and special parameters such as masks and adjustment layers, so you can come back and tweak it at any point. So we just call this Lion Edit and save it onto your computer. There we go. That's where we'll leave it for this lesson. Next lesson, we'll go and put this lion into the Antarctica picture and make sure it looks balanced and scaled and works effectively.